Hi, everybody. It's Professor Wills from Pasadena City College. We are moving forward in the 20th century and continuing our discussion of the art of Pablo Picasso. But first, let's meet a close associate and fellow Cubist, Georges Braque. Together, the two men are credited with the art historical style known as Cubism. So let's take a look at the art of Georges Braque. All right, pulling up my PowerPoint here, we have a painting associated with Georges Braque called the Portuguesa. It is a painting that depicts a Portuguese guitar player that he saw in a bar in southern France, in Marseille. And so that became his muse to explore this art historical style known as Cubism. I'm going to take my little image away here so we can appreciate the painting in its entirety. All right, I'll catch up with you later. Visually. Georges Braque was a French painter, and while Picasso was living in Paris, they became friends, and together they really began carving out a pathway in the avant-garde spirit to describe a subject that usually in traditional art history would be described from a very fixed vantage point, in a sort of frozen or fixed perception of that subject, with all of the traditional characteristics of optical realism we've been talking about since the Renaissance, chiaroscuro, maybe techniques of perception. Again, making art an illusion of, or an extension of our optical reality. Well, as we've been talking about the past few lectures, that is definitely going away. And we see that definitely in this painting of this Portuguese guitarist. If you look closely, you can kind of pick out elements of a human form. You can perhaps see right here the sound box of the guitar, some lines maybe referencing the chords or strings of the guitar, maybe the arm of the instrument up here. But other than that, what you find very similar to what Picasso did in his Demoiselle d'Avignon painting is a focus on form, on planes, on shapes. And unlike earlier artists, the Fauves, the German expressionists, the post-impressionists, etc., we are starting to see what artists like Picasso and Braque are doing is reducing color. His palette is a simple mix of tans and browns and creams, and that is to emphasize the forms that he's describing in this painting. Now, how did the name Cubism come about? Well, you know, kind of like with the Impressionists, when the art critics saw paintings like this, they said, "Oh, it looks like it's just made up of a bunch of little cubes and pieces." So that's how Cubism came along to describe this art. But what you find is a painting where forms are removed from their familiar contexts and environments. They're dissected, they're taken apart, sifted into their constituent elements, and then rearranged, layered, seemingly in new and dynamic ways. Much like we saw with some of our earlier work by Picasso, we see objects in Georges Braque's art that are fractured. And again, one viewpoint or reading of the image is not possible at all. His art is made up of both larger planes, you can see them here, but smaller ones as well. He also plays a little bit with shading. You might notice that some of the shapes are shaded with, as one would model shadows falling on one side of an object, or add lighter hues to render the highlights of a subject. That it's almost like the concept of warm and cool colors. It creates this idea of things that, recede and other objects that project forward. But it also, what you see here with Georges Braque is that he's not afraid to kind of intersect objects, to layer them, to make some of them transparent or see-through, as if, manipulating form, shape, light sources, and really breaking away from the paradigm of traditional art history as we know it. So these shifting views, things that are just, fractured and dissected, this is very much in line with things that are unseen to the naked eye, along the lines of what Einstein's going to come up with, and other scientists in regard to physics. And so together with Pablo Picasso, Georges Braque innovates this artistic language known as Cubism, breaking a path forward in ways that will be revolutionary to how art will be expressed in both the 20th and 21st centuries. Now, moving forward, let's get back to Picasso and see his artistic journey as Cubism becomes an important artistic vehicle for a very important subject. And I'll come back and join you for this one. All right, good to see you again. This next painting in this mini video lecture is Picasso's Guernica from 1937. This is considered his masterpiece painting. It is a very large scale painting, measuring about 11 feet approximately in height by about 20 feet, 25 feet in length. You can see it has this very extended, almost panoramic kind of format. I have a slide of the artist himself standing below it from the 1930s, and then here's a view in a museum, so you get a sense of its enormity and scale. The subject and the title is based on an actual location in the Basque region of northern Spain. And at this point in time, Spain had been controlled by a dictator, General Franco, who was starting to pick up on the frustration of Spaniards with his rule, his weaknesses, right? And so very familiar story in Spanish history, as we saw in the work of Francisco Goya, and his painting, the 3rd of May, 1808, is you find rulers reach out for powerful allies, and that's what Franco did when he reached out to the most powerful in Europe in the 1930s, being Adolf Hitler from Germany, who asked a favor for a little help getting control with some of the insurrection and rebellion happening in Spain in the Basque region. And so Hitler sends in his powerful air force, the Luftwaffe, and in they flew with their bombs. In the middle of the day, which was a traditional active market shopping day in Guernica, those bombs fell, killing and injuring thousands of people. Picasso was up in Paris at this time, horrified by what he heard. Now, this is not an artist who was engaged in politics. He was not like Courbet or Daumier, right? He wasn't a social activist or, illuminating the social inequities or abuses to the powerless. Well, this opened his eyes. And so when there was an opportunity to exhibit at a Paris exposition, he took advantage of creating this monumental size painting to not tell the story specifically of what happened in Guernica, but really to tell the story, the universal story of brutality, of violence, of man versus man, of how humankind has inflicted this kind of abuse on one another throughout history. So let's take a look at how he is described that. Now keep in mind, Cubism is the perfect artistic style to render the fractioning, the destruction of what happened when bombs fell on Guernica. And so this kind of multiple ways of seeing is the perfect way to kind of describe the universal abuse and violence that is the core message of Guernica. So with a reduction, again, just to a more of a black and white palette, we see the focus on form, which is exactly what Picasso is about. On the left, you can see a woman who is cradling her dead child in her arms. On the bottom left as well, you see a fallen soldier clutching a broken sword. Again, a sword is not a 20th century weapon. It's a symbol or a soldier representing all soldiers throughout human history. On the far right, you see a woman, arms extended, caught in a burning, bombed out building. Another woman inside profile, just the face, right? We're just seeing parts and forms, with an arm holding a lamp, is illuminating what is happening here, shining a light in the form of a triangle. Now remember, we studied the Renaissance triangle back with Leonardo, where that represented calm and stability. This is the opposite. Picasso is using that iconic shape instead to convey the chaos, the violence, the destruction of what happens during wars, during violent acts of human against human. A horse here, animals become powerful vehicles. We saw that in the art of Franz Marc as well. Mouth agape in a scream as it is dying in violence. A horse is often associated with war as well. Here's a bull. Bull is an iconic animal associated with Spain, think bullfighting, but Picasso using it as a symbol of brutality in Guernica as well. Finally, this element here looks like a ceiling light fixture with a light bulb. This is supposed to be, has been interpreted as symbolic of the all-seeing eye of God watching what's happening, again, the sins of mankind. It's not a religious painting, it's a painting meant to, really explore through this Cubist art historical style, not only what transpired and horrified Picasso in his native Spain, but again to underscore the repeat story and cycles of history and in the behavior of humanity. That is Picasso's Guernica. Thanks for joining me.